This podcast is supported by Wesleyan Financial Services, providers of specialist financial advice to members of the legal profession. Wesleyan's team of dedicated experts have been helping law firms and their employees achieve financial well-being over many years, providing personal and commercial financial advice, in-firm seminars and online guidance. Strategic partners with the Law Society, Wesleyan is proud of its partnership with Women in the Law UK. For more information about Wesleyan, visit wesleyan.co.uk, or to arrange a financial education event in your firm or a no-obligation financial health check, connect with Sarah Deacon, Wesleyan Area Manager, on LinkedIn.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Talking Law from Women in the Law UK. I'm Sally Penni, MBE, a barrister at Kenworthy's Chambers in Manchester, the Joint Vice Chair of the Association of Women Barristers and the founder of Women in the Law UK. You can find out more about our organisation on Twitter at Women in the Law UK or online at womeninthelawuk.com. Today you'll be hearing from Professor Leslie Thomas, QC, a barrister who specialises in claims against the police and other public authorities, civil litigation, human rights, data and privacy claims. Leslie recounts an extensive career tackling racism, discrimination, police brutality, including his work on the case of Christopher Alder. He also reveals how he looks after his well-being through music and languages. I asked him why he chose to go into the law.
I suppose more than one reason. I would have been about 13, 14. I grew up in South London, and that was quite an influential stage in my development. I remember studying sociology at school. I had some great teachers who were very political in some of their activism, and I suppose some of that rubbed up on me. Also, it didn't help by the fact that I was stopped and searched by the police for no good reason. You know, you've got to remember this was the late 70s, early 80s. Margaret Thatcher had just got into power, and there was a lot of injustice in our society in a similar way that we see today, and I thought I wanted to do something about it. So, it was about 13, 14, I began to develop an interest in law and saw that as something that I wanted to do.
I mean, did you know anybody in the law? Did you have a role model? How did you go about it?
I didn't know anybody in the law. I grew up in South London. I went to a comprehensive. My folks lived in social housing. I come from a very modest and humble background, and there were no lawyers. In fact, there were no professionals in my family.
Yes. The area of law you specialise in, which is dealing with deaths, how did that come about? Inquests, you and in Grenfell, you've been in some leading cases, giving a voice to families who have lost loved ones. How did you end up specialising in that area?
Well, I was never really interested in making a ton of money, like some lawyers can do. I wasn't particularly keen on corporate law. When I was at law school, everyone was being groomed to enter the corporate world. And there was a small handful of us law students who wanted to go to the bar and be independent. And I had the belief that I wanted to work for myself and not for a firm, be responsible for what I did. At that point, I didn't know I would be specialising in cases such as, deaths in custody. In fact, it was more to do with social justice law of all types. That was what interested me. When I became a tenant at Wellington Street Chambers, having done a commercial pupillage, and I wanted to get out of that as soon as I could, I started representing tenants against bad landlords. I did a lot of housing law. I did educational law representing children who've been excluded from schools. I did a lot of personal injury representing claimants taken on companies or people who had injured them.
Yes.
I did employment law, representing employees, taking on employers. I did a lot of discrimination cases, representing people who'd been discriminated against. And then, after spending, a few years, in my early years, doing those sorts of cases, I discovered police cases. And I had a real passion for doing police work. I took on a number of civil actions. I had been trained when I was at Wellington Street Chambers. I had a fantastic training there. There was one of my supervisors was a barrister there called James Wood. James trained me to do them, and so I started doing them. And what was great was it meant that I could be in front of juries, but be in front of juries on civil claims, which is what interested me. The one thing I was never really into was doing crime, doing criminal law. I did a little bit of criminal law in the beginning, but it was never really for me. I wanted to do political or protest crime, where people had been criminalised for their beliefs. But as I began to develop and progress outside the magistrates' court, I found that I was expected to go to the Crown Court and represent people who'd been charged with pretty nasty offences, which honestly I didn't have my heart in doing that. That's not to say that people don't deserve the best criminal defence that they can get, but it just wasn't for me. I wasn't interested in it. And then all of a sudden, I was instructed on my first inquest, and it had everything. You could examine parts of the criminal justice system. You could be on the side of what I consider to be the righteous. So I was representing bereaved families who had lost loved ones, who had died in the most horrific circumstances. The advocacy was amazing. You could do really great advocacy before a jury. There was fantastic legal argument. Oftentimes these cases would lead to challenges in the administrative court, so I was doing lots of judicial review. So it just had everything to it, and it was something I could feel really passionate about. And it meant that I could represent many people from the black or BAME communities who had suffered bereavements at the hands of the police, at the hands of prison establishments, at the hands of psychiatric hospitals.
Yes.
It just ticked all of the boxes for me.
Wonderful. I always ask this, and it's really hard to answer, because especially for you, because you're giving such a voice to all these people. Is there a particular case in your career which has really changed or touched you? Sometimes people say, Laura Cox talked about a European case she did, and that kind of set her on the path. And other people say it was the first case I did when I was on my feet and pupillage. I probably fall into that category. But I wondered if there was a case that you've conducted in your career which is really still stays with you now. I dare say none of them leave you, but that you could share.
Yeah, that's an easy question for me, because it's a case I will never forget for a number of reasons. It would have to be Christopher Alder. Christopher was the black paratrooper who died in the Hull police station. And I did his inquest in the year 2000. And the case was interesting on a number of levels. First, it was interesting because it was the year that the Human Rights Act came into force. So the Human Rights Act is 1998.
Yeah.
It came into force in 2000. And I did Christopher Alder's case in the July and August of 2000, and the Human Rights Act was about to come into force on the 2nd of October. Actually, 20 years ago this month, and in fact, it was 20 years ago I did Christopher Alder. My goodness,
wow.
Where has the time gone?
Yes, but, absolutely.
So it was interesting on that level, because the coroner embraced the up and coming Human Rights Act, and so it was really a fully compliant human rights inquest. So it was one of the first ones that I did bearing in mind the Human Rights Act. But the main reason why I remember this case, and it will live with me until the day that I pass this earth, is because it was the first case where captured on CCTV, it was the first of my case captured on CCTV, where you see somebody die. And you actually see Christopher Alder die on camera. That was shocking in itself, but what was even more shocking was the fact that you had 5 white police officers standing around watching a black man die before their eyes, and they were laughing and joking in the police station. They didn't check him. They were chatting amongst themselves, and Christopher was slowly passing before their very eyes, and you actually hear his death groan. And when he passes, that's when they panic and run into action and start to try to resuscitate him and deal with him. What's interesting, just 2 days ago, there's a film director called Ken Farrow who has done a number of films touching injustice and police restraint and police brutality. And he's just done a film called Ultra Violence, which had its premiere 2 evenings ago. I would say if you'd be interested in the work that I do, to watch Ken Farrow's film. It's currently being showcased at the British Film Festival. If you go to the BFI, the British Film Institute's website,
yes,
you can actually watch it because it's showcased there. He actually, as one of the cases of injustice that he looks at the case of Christopher Alder, and you actually see the footage. I don't know how he's got the footage, but he's got the footage of Christopher dying on the police station floor, and the officers panicking when they realise it. And it's the first time I've seen that footage out, clearly outside the inquest. So that's a case that really touches me. And the other reason why this case is important is Janet Alder has just been an inspiration. She has fought tooth and nail to get justice for her brother, and she has not given up despite the fact that there have been so many hurdles. The other thing about the Alder case is that it's a case where the police spy on Janet and they spy on me. We were spied on during the inquest, and I learned about that several years afterwards.
Yes, quite. Leslie, one of the things that's been really shocking and impactful for our nation and globally is watching the death of George Floyd in our homes. And so, talking about Christopher Alder was just making me think about that and the emotion that we all felt. And of course, re-sparking Black Lives Matter movement. And you spoke about your own experiences as a professional Black person, even not getting through the doors of security to get to court, whilst our opponents and our colleagues waved through. I just wonder if I can ask you, and I always ask everyone this, but what do you think about Black Lives Matter, diversity in our country? How can we do better, get better? It's a big question, but Black Lives Matter, diversity.
It is a big question, and it's going to require a big answer. So let me see if I can unpick it. Look, one of the things you mentioned was the death of George Floyd. Now, when I first saw that death, and saw the first footage being brought into our homes, I still have not managed to watch the entirety of the 9 minutes or so that George is under the knee of a police officer. I can't bring myself to watch it. I see too much death in my job. That's my day job. What Floyd's death has done is it's brought alive this issue about police violence and discrimination and racism against people of colour. Now, here's the thing, Sally. George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe," it is nothing unique to the cases that I've been involved in over the years. I've done several cases where police have restrained or killed people whilst in their care or in their custody, and they've been saying, "I can't breathe." You know, a couple of cases come to mind straight away. I did a case in 2016, Terry Smith. He was captured on CCTV, one of the Surrey police stations, saying, "I can't breathe" several times. We had an extremely critical verdict. Terry was a white man. Yes. But more recently, in 2018, this is a case that was decided last Friday. You know, when I say last Friday at the time we're recording this. So, you know, yes. Of Kevin Clark. Kevin Clark was restrained in a sports field in South London by several police officers from Lewisham Police Station. Now, you know, he's a black man. He was suffering from schizophrenia. He wasn't a criminal. He was a patient. He was having an episode because he had a relapse. And he was, you know, several police officers come to him and they restrain him in this field. And he says to them on several occasions, "I can't breathe." And yet still they continue to restrain. And he dies under their restraint. And we have a jury, a South London jury, who determined last week that the restraint played a more than significant part in his demise. And this jury also finds that Kevin was saying, "I can't breathe." And more importantly, despite the police officers saying, you know, all the police officers, and there were up to 9 of them who were involved at various stages in his restraint, despite every single one of them saying, "Oh, I never heard him say I can't breathe," the jury found as a fact that at least one of them heard him saying he couldn't breathe, to the extent that one of the officers was saying, "Kevin, you've got to breathe, you've got to breathe." Now, why would a police officer be saying, "Kevin, you've got to breathe, you've got to breathe," if they never heard him say, "I can't breathe"? And the jury found the officers were not telling them the truth. So these cases, Kevin was a large black man being killed. And I say being killed because he was restrained, and the jury have found that the restraint contributed to his death by a number of white police officers. Indicates to me that we have a problem on our shores. This is not just a problem in the States. Now, where the Black Lives Matter movement comes in is that you've got a new consciousness of young people, old people, black people, white people, all coming together and saying that this is unacceptable. And it's unacceptable not just in the criminal justice system, but across society as a whole. And that's the power of the movement. I did another podcast not too long ago where somebody was saying, "Well, why Black Lives Matter? Why are Black lives seen as more important than any other lives?" And I said, "No, you've missed the point. It's not that Black lives are to be elevated amongst any other lives. It's Black Lives Matter too, or Black Lives Matter as well." And it's important that people understand that. And so when you have a movement developing that says all lives matter, that's missing the point, because there isn't a disproportionate number of white people who are being killed at the hands of the police. You just need to look, not too long ago, the Lammy Review in 2017, where David Lammy was commissioned by the government of the time, the Conservative government of the time, to look at the criminal justice system to see whether or not there were any discrepancies or injustices. And he found so many injustices. So, for instance, he found that there was, and this is on the government's own statistics, a disproportionate number of black people being criminalised in comparison to their white counterparts. Disproportionate number of black children being criminalised in the youth courts. At every stage of the criminal justice system, from arrest, stop and search, charging decisions, prosecutorial decisions, and sentencing, and when you get to the prison system,
Prisons,
you have disproportionality in that when you look at the numbers of black people in this country, black people, particularly young black men, are being treated in a disproportionate way to their white counterparts. Now, here's the thing, and I like this in the Lammy Review, where you have this disproportionality, if there is a good reason for it, if it can be justified, then so be it. But more often, there was no apparent justification for the treatment. The disproportionate figures could not be explained. And what Lammy says in his report, right at the very beginning, is that we should have a system whereby, if on the face of it there is no obvious justification for the differential treatment, it should be called out as racist, institutionally racist. And so that's really important. This is a long-winded answer, and I apologise for that, Sally, but you can tell that I feel passionate about this. The Black Lives Matter movement has brought this all to the front to everybody's attention in 2020. Young lawyers like Alexandra Wilson, who's a friend of mine, who, I just think what she did was brilliant. She called out the treatment.
Yes.
Sally, undoubtedly, you and I, how many times have we been to court and we've been mistaken for anybody but the barrister? It's happened to me on a ton of occasions. Alex calls it out, and rightly so.
Yeah.
Because everybody's attention, oh, how terrible, how awful. But this has been happening for years.
I know.
I remember when I was a junior, I was a couple of years called, there was a black woman in my chambers at Wellington Street called Nicola Williams, fantastic advocate, brilliant barrister. And I remember Nicola telling the story that she would be everyone but the barrister. She would be the barrister's mother, the barrister's sister, the clerk, everybody but the barrister. And, so when I hear Alex saying it, sort of like 30 years later, she's still having this experience as a woman of colour entering the courts. It saddens me, but it doesn't surprise me, because ask any person of colour whether they've had a similar experience. I would say the vast majority, if not all of us, have had that experience.
Yes. Well, but Leslie, how important is it to call it out? Because I can tell you it is exhausting. And when that happened, the number of my friends who were not black, who sent it to me asking, has this ever happened to you, was extraordinary. And you're right, we have had it. But we can't call out everything. It is exhausting. We go to court to, in my case, whether it's a criminal court or an employment case, to deal with our cases, and yet we have this on top of it. But can we spend the whole time calling out everything?
No, it's tiring. It really, and in fact, oftentimes we become so desensitized to it that we just see it as a part of the experience that we have in the workplace. But I think it needs to be called out. Here's the thing: what happened to Alex was terrible, right? But not unique. What was interesting is she calling it out gauged a reaction that I hadn't seen before. That is the head of the court services, contacting Alex and apologising.
Yes.
And that's the benefit of it, because what it means that court staff, court security, clerks and judges and other barristers, they need to think twice before they say, next time I walk into a robing room without my robes on, have you arrived in the wrong place? What are you looking for? Whereas white counterparts are not asked that question. I want people to pause before they engage mouth.
Yes.
Who work in the criminal justice system, and so calling out achieves that very least.
Well, Leslie, I'm going to ask you sort of some slightly different set of questions now. You do quite a traumatic part of the law, and you're passionate about it. I can hear that from just talking to you and interviewing you. And I can see a saxophone in the background. So I'm wondering what you do for well-being, because let's face it, the burnout rate at the bar is not great. It's great the Bar Council's been doing so much work on wellness, well-being, but what do you do to switch off? I
have 3 key hobbies. So yeah, you've spotted my tenor saxophone. I'm a jazz musician, and so I play the saxophone, and I write small jazz compositions over jazz standards and chord changes. That's the creative side of me that keeps me sane. The second main thing I do for my well-being is I like physical activity. So I walk, and particularly during lockdown, one of the things that I do is that I've been walking about 8 to 10 kilometres every morning. I always have been an early riser, so I get up about, sometime in the summer I get up about 4:30, in the winter I get up about 5:30, and I go for a walk. And to walk about 8 to 10 kilometres takes me between an hour to maybe an hour and 20 minutes. And I listen to podcasts while I'm walking. That's a great form of exercise. And then the third thing that I do, I love languages. I'm a little bit of a polyglot, and I like learning languages. I've been a lifelong learner of French from when I was at school, and I try to keep my French up to speed. Since my early 30s, I've been a lover of the Russian language, so I speak Russian, and at an intermediate level. I wouldn't say I was fluent, but I can hold a reasonable conversation. I can even have a reasonable conversation about the law in Russian.
Wow.
So currently, I'm actively learning Spanish, and I'm actively learning Polish. Polish is Slavic language, similar to Russian, some similar vocabulary, so I thought that I'll try that. And I'm learning Polish and Spanish. I'm not finding Spanish difficult at all. I never studied Spanish at school, and I'm just learning that, and I'm finding that fine. I find reading Spanish very easy.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to come to a tricky question at the end about languages, because, of course, there was Britain's first Black female High Court judge was fluent in Russian. And so I'll ask you something about that at the end. Can I ask you about being a professor at a very prestigious college? How did that come about, and how do you fit that in?
The way that came about, I was contacted by Gresham's last Professor of Law, Professor Joe Delahunty, QC.
Yes.
And Joe contacted me and said to me, this was about a year ago, November 2019. She said that her tenure as law professor was coming to an end. And she said, have I thought about applying for the position? I hadn't actually. I didn't know much about Gresham, to be quite honest with you. I had listened to a couple of Joe's lectures, but I didn't know that much about Gresham. And I thought about it, spoke to some friends, and thought, yeah, why don't I go in for it? But then I had to think, how would I sell myself to Gresham? And I thought, they've never had somebody who looks like me as a law professor in their 400-year history, so I'd be the first Black law professor. And also, I don't think that they had somebody who'd done a series of lectures and presentations that I wanted to present, which I wanted to showcase the work that I did: deaths in custody, deaths at the hands of the state, human rights, discrimination. So I did a pitch to them, and I had to do a mock lecture to them. I think they were really impressed. They interviewed me, I think it was in February of this year. I proposed a series of lectures, including one of the lectures, and remember, this is back in February. One of the lectures I proposed was that police need to exercise more restraint when they restrain. And then they took me on, and we made the announcement in June. Now, here's the thing. Timing is a funny thing in life, because the week that they announced my lectureship, my professorship at Gresham, was the very week that George Floyd was killed in the States, which was just, the timing was just uncanny. And so I was able to springboard off everything that happened with George Floyd, the Black Lives Movement, with the commencement of my lecture series. I did the first lecture on the 1st of October, which was the start of Black History Month, which was nice timing. The next one's coming up on the 3rd of December. I love it, and it's what a wonderful platform. And the response that I've had from people all over the world has been amazing. I think they've really enjoyed the lectures that my first lecture they really enjoyed, and they love my passion. Because I do feel passionate about what I have to speak about. I think I've got a lot to share. And it's just a wonderful platform for me as a black professional, black man, to show the world that we can be intellectual as well.
Yes.
And I think being a role model is important. I never used to see myself as a role model, but whether I like it or not, I am.
Yes.
And people do look to me for guidance and advice. So I'm embracing that position now.
Which is wonderful. Now, something you said in that answer that actually in the pitch, firstly, gosh, having been a self-employed barrister for God knows how, nearly 30 years, Leslie, I don't think you would have had a job interview or a pitch for quite some time. I didn't think so. So that must have been interesting just prepping. But my question is about the way you look. I've got 2 sons and a daughter. My boys have got big afros. They're all under 10, so that's their choice. But, you've got really quite nice hair. I can see grays there. You braid it. Sometimes it's in dreads. Is that a deliberate look, or do you, because you could just shave it, couldn't you?
It is a deliberate look. I embrace my dreadlocks. And there's an interesting story behind my dreadlocks. There was, after I did the case of Christopher Alder, I received a complaint against me which didn't go anywhere. I think it's just part and parcel of doing this job that you will, if you're performing a public service at times, people will make complaints against you. Half the time, those complaints will be unjustified. Speaking of which, I had a complaint lodged against me recently simply because I had dared to suggest that race was inextricably linked with the fire at Grenfell, and the member of the public wrote to the Bar Standards Board, of which I'm a member. So, they had to get independent barristers to look at this complaint because I had dared to make a submission that the inquiry needed to look at race when they're considering why so many people of colour died in Grenfell, and that offended somebody. And I think their argument was a fire doesn't discriminate. Well, fire doesn't discriminate, but you need to ask the question: why did so many black people and brown people die in this fire? It's the elephant in the room. But coming back to my hair, when this complaint was made against me about 20 years ago, I decided I'm going to embrace my blackness and everything about me being black, and I wasn't going to, be respectable or do what people expect of me. That, because all too often we as black people are told what to do with our hair. Black women are told, oh, no, you can't have your hair like this. You should straighten your hair, or, you need to have your hair in a certain way. No. We should be able to have our hair as part. If our hair is part of our identity, we shouldn't have to have our hair in a way that it is that conforms to visions of white beauty or visions of white acceptance. And therefore, when I thought about it, I thought, what I'm going to do? At first, I had my hair in cornrows, and then I had that for a couple of years, and then I decided, no, I was going to locks my hair. So I started locks in my hair, and my hair's been locks ever since. And I love my locks, and when I go into court, if I'm feeling, particularly as if I want to be confrontational with a witness, I have my locks out. I do that deliberately. just to intimidate is part of the dark arts of advocacy. Seeing a black man with long locks, sort of like questioning you and perhaps challenging your evidence robustly.
Yes. Well, let me ask you, we've talked a lot about music, the law, of course. What about reading? I want to ask you about a favourite book that you might have and why, and also if you've got a favourite fictional legal character.
My favourite book, a book that I come back to time and time again, is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I just love that book. I love the quote in it: everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of all human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way. I just love that. And what I take from Frankl's book, because he was a Holocaust survivor,
yes.
Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how.
Yes.
So that's my favourite book. I'm currently reading a really interesting book. I'm trying to increase my anti-discrimination knowledge, and
yes.
so if I expect my white allies to be educated, I've got to educate myself. So I've got a ton of anti-discrimination literature, and the one book I'm reading at the moment is The Clapback by Elijah Lowell, which is a brilliant book, which it's the guide calling out racist stereotypes. And what Lowell does is he unpicks all the racist stereotypes against black people, sort of like, our identity. Where do you come from? Why do people always ask you, so where are you from? I speak like this, and it's quite clear that I'm a Londoner, and I still have people saying to me, but where are you from? But where are you really from? He deals with stereotypes about food we eat, he deals with stereotypes about the police, he deals with stereotypes about sport. It's really funny, actually, because one of the stereotypes about sport is black people can't swim. And I actually remember my old school PE teacher coming out with some rubbish about black people having heavier bones, and that's the reason why black people can't swim. And he just debunks that myth. So those are books that I'm currently reading. I always come back to Man's Search for Meaning. As regards my favourite fictional lawyer, it's got to be Victor Sofrentis from LA Law. I just love Victor. He was handsome. He was smooth. He was passionate. He was into civil rights, and he had this. I don't know if you're probably too young to remember LA Law.
No, I do. I remember all of them. It was brilliant.
Yeah, but in LA Law, Victor was the rebel, and he inspired me when I was going to law school. I saw myself as the activist, the rebel, the one who would take difficult cases, the challenging cases. So that he was my inspiration.
Fantastic. Now, Leslie, you are one of the eminent chambers in the UK and indeed globally. Garden Court, you've got not an annex, it's now as chambers of his own in Manchester, Garden Court North. I wonder, for young people entering the profession, because you've spoken at so many pupillage fairs, the Inns events, Inner Temples, not my Inn, but you've spoken so many students to encourage them to enter and stay. I wonder if you had maybe 3 short tips for young people, because the climate is difficult at the moment with COVID and finding places and just general struggle about the law. What would you say to some people wanting to enter the law, or about retention, or about longevity? I always say it's a marathon, not a sprint, just to encourage.
The first thing I would say is you really do need to know yourself, know thyself, know your strengths, know your weaknesses. When you know yourself, you know what you're passionate about, because if you can be passionate about something, it will make the way easier, particularly as coming to the bar in particular is very competitive now. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody not to go to the bar, right?
Me neither, yeah.
If that's your dream, you should go for it, but you need to know why you're going for it. So that's number one. Know yourself. Only you know what your most secret thoughts and what drives you when you pull the covers over your head at night. And you just got to embrace that and be honest with yourself and follow your passions. That's number one. Number two, you can't hit a target unless you know what you're aiming for. So you need to have a plan. And to have a plan, that's not something that's wishy-washy, that's going around in your head. A plan has to be committed to paper. So I always say, have a plan, write it down, right? And, think through your plan. And here's a good, nice thing about plans. They can always change. And in fact, my plan has changed over the years. I remember when I was about 25, I had a 5-year plan. When I got to 30, I changed my 5-year plan to a 10-year plan. I got to 40, and I made another 5-year plan. Got to 45, and made another 10-year plan. In other words, it's not something that's written in stone. It's constantly changing. And the nice thing about plans, you'll set goals in your plan, and if you don't hit a goal, you can always move it. You can change your goals, but it gives you a direction. And so that's important, not just for beginners, but for those of us who have been in this game for a period of time. It's refreshing to, again, commit yourself to paper and think through, where do I want to go, and set some goals for the next few years. It just makes doing what we do, better.
Yes.
The third thing I would say, preparation is key.
Yeah.
You really need to be prepared. So I prepared for this interview with you.
Yeah.
I thought it was important to do that because I didn't want to shortchange the people who would be listening to this.
Yes.
By coming on and just winging it. Everything we do, we should prepare for it. Now, oftentimes the preparations are not going to be the same, but some preparation is always better than no preparation.
Yes, absolutely. Professor Thomas, it feels wrong calling you Leslie. I don't know why.
I can live with Professor.
Professor. Just Prof. I need to congratulate you because I've seen that you've taken a seat at Goldsmith University, which is an excellent university.
Yeah, I'm really honoured. Thank you. It was such an honour for Goldsmiths to invite me to become one of their visiting professors. So that was just lovely. I just feel honoured that all these people would want me associated with their establishments or institutions. It's a real honour. I still suffer from imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I wake up and pinch myself and say, is this happening? Do they mean me?
Yes.
They want me to speak?
Yes. And it's amazing. I mean, gosh, we all do. I think people who say they don't suffer from it are fools, in my view. And I'm congratulating you because I'm thinking about what's next. Lord Reed gave an interview about a week ago, and he's got a plan, 6 years before he retires, and he's a great man. And he's saying what Lord Neuberger said, and he's saying to a large extent what Lady Hale said, who of course did much for women. I set up a women's organisation. And so I'm looking in the Supreme Court and I'm seeing the composition of that court. And I'm reading Lord Reed's interview and watching it, and I'm listening to you. And I'm wondering, Professor Thomas, might the Supreme Court be a place that you might consider, or the High Court, or the Court of Appeal, the decision-making places in the law? And what's next, really?
Had you asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have said no. I just wasn't interested in becoming a member of the judiciary.
Yes.
Now, I don't know. It's something I might think about. Not in the immediate future, but it's not something that I would rule out. Because I actually do think it's necessary for us to, when I say us, I mean, people of colour to step up.
Yes.
And to take these positions particularly when we have the opportunity to do so. So I would not rule it out. Whether or not they would want me and whether or not I would be capable is another issue. I have no idea.
I think a professor of a college appointed you on merit for your ability. That speaks volumes for me, not just on the basis of race. So you're more than capable. Can I ask a final question about gender? Dexter Dyer's Queen's Counsel, who's in your chambers, I love talking to him because we have many debates about things. And one of the issues are, as you alluded to, minorities self-select out of established places. And often there is no progress, which is why I was asking the question about the Supreme Court. But I wonder, women suffer a double deficit.
Absolutely.
In society, particularly Black women, women of colour. And so I wonder what you think about the status quo now for women. I've seen all the statistics on judicial appointments. I've seen the footsie appointments in business and in the senior places. And so I wonder, what are your views and what can we do to try and improve the issue of gender?
So this is what I would say. Not all minority groups are affected in the same way.
Yeah.
All right. And so I think it's really important to recognise that and not lump us all together.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot that's happened in terms of the fight for gender equality. You can see that in terms of judges.
Yes.
At all levels.
Yes.
And there's still a long way to go, but it's moved a lot faster than it has in terms of, say, people of colour.
Yeah.
And there's differences between people of colour. So, there's a real problem in terms of, Black men in the profession on the bench.
Yes.
As compared to, say, white women.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You make a really important point, because you make the point about I acknowledge and accept that my Black sisters do not face the same difficulties. The difficulties they face are different to the difficulties that I face.
Yes.
And so I know that there's a number of really interesting young Black barristers who are calling out the problems that they face, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. So the answer to your question is what can be done. I think it's important that we educate ourselves and we recognise that different minority groups have different are affected and impacted in different ways, and I think that's really important. And we educate ourselves in relation to that, and we don't just group and lump everybody together, thinking that the experience of everybody is the same.
Yes, fantastic. Professor Thomas, I think I need to have you back on this podcast because there's so much more we could talk about. It's been wonderful. Thank you for talking law with me.
An absolute pleasure, Sally. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And we look forward to hearing you play the saxophone. I think my children could learn a thing or two from these endless lessons. Thank you so much, Professor Thomas.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you so much for listening to Talking Law with me, Sally Penni, MBE. You can find me on Twitter @SallyPenni1. We'd really appreciate it if you left us a rating or a review. Thank you in advance. Remember, if you've enjoyed the podcast, then you can now buy Talking Law 2, a book with advice for students and lawyers on well-being, resilience, and of course, on financial well-being, plus some of the podcast interviews. Thanks to Wesleyan Financial Services for supporting this episode, and thanks also to Sam Walker and our production team at What Goes On Media. See you next time.